Welcome to my channel. My name is Gréta and I do sign-along videos to random songs as well as sign-by-sign tutorials, but today I will be focusing on something different. If you watch my introduction video, which you can watch if you click on the card above, you know that I started learning British Sign Language after my diagnosis of, well, my hearing not being perfect. And it's likely to get worse, but we don't know the cause. So yay! Anyways, as I embarked on my journey to learn BSL, I realised that even the most basic signs became helpful with my POTS. But before getting into the details, let's talk about what POTS is. POTS stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome, and it is basically a dysfunction of your autonomic nervous system, which is the bit that is responsible for everything that you don't normally think about, like breathing, your temperature, and your heart beating, among other things. The symptoms include, but aren't limited to, palpitations, lightheadedness, pre-syncope, which is almost fainting, or syncope, so completely fainting, chest pains and brain fog, among others, but these are the most relevant to today's video. If you want to learn more about the condition, you can follow the link I put in the description, which leads you to POTS UK's website, which is an amazing foundation that supports people with this condition. Do let me know if you have any specific questions that you'd like me to address in future videos. Please note that I can only speak of my own experience, and as with most conditions, but living with POTS is different from person to person, or even day to day, to be honest. Especially in the evenings, I have issues with my circulation as my daytime medications start wearing off. So most of my blood ends up in my tummy or in my feet, which is not really useful, especially as there's not enough to go around to my brain. Unfortunately, it becomes very obvious very quickly which brain areas of mine are deprived of oxygen, as certain tasks, such as speech, become completely impossible, which phenomenon is called aphasia. And if I'm still conscious, it can be incredibly frustrating. In my desperation, I had this tickle in my brain and realized that if I am not too fuzzy yet and my speech goes, I can still use signs. Only if people knew more BSL around me. But even knowing that the communication issues are not because of me is just a huge relief. You might be thinking, how is it possible that I cannot speak any of the 3 verbal languages I normally can, but sign language doesn't let me down? As a soon-to-be Neuroscience graduate, I feel like I am somewhat qualified to try and answer that question. We normally process languages at 2 different points: when we speak and when we are trying to understand others. Therefore, our brain needs 2 different pathways, and I made this drawing to help us out. First, there are different movement initiation areas in our brain. You can see that the region responsible for the face and mouth movement, which is primarily used in spoken language, is a fair distance away from the region responsible for hand and arm movements, which are typically equipped in sign language. But there is a difference between poking our tongues out and making facial and hand gestures. So what makes the difference? Broca's area and Wernicke's area are the 2 main regions that are primarily known for speech production and speech perception, respectively. As you can see, they surround the auditory or hearing brain region, as the majority of the population uses hearing as speech as primary face-to-face communication. However, in contrast to what scientists first thought, these areas are also activated when using sign language, and the hearing region in people who were born deaf take a role in understanding and using BSL and other sign languages. But then, how is it possible that sometimes I cannot use spoken language, but I can use BSL? Great question, hypothetical subscriber. As I have no way actually probing my brain to see which regions are active and which aren't during these frustrating times, I have no certain answer. Most studies use deaf native signers, which means they were born deaf and were raised with sign language from day one. So it is hard to find explanation in the literature as well. But there is an area which is indicated to be activated in both hearing and deaf signers, which indicates that it has a direct link to the use of sign language regardless of the signer's hearing status, which is just amazing. It is the parietal lobe, as shown here in green. There are some hypotheses going around about what might cause this extra activation, for example proprioception, hand position and movement production. Regardless of what the cause is, I am grateful for the feeling of independence it gives me when I feel trapped in my own body without any other ways of communication. Of course, the oxygen levels in my brain often get even lower. When I cannot understand anything and moving my eyes is hard enough, let alone signing. But luckily, my consciousness is reduced when it gets to those levels, so I can barely remember any of it and it feels less scary. People around me would probably disagree when it happens. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions specific to this video, or if you want me to cover anything related by commenting below. Or you can also find me on Twitter and on Instagram. I also put a link in the description to a chapter by Goldberg and Hillis that I found really useful when I was making this video alongside my textbooks and lecture notes. On Thursday, the side-by-side tutorial for Billie Eilish's Happier Than Ever is coming out, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks again. Take care. Bye bye.